If you think photography is just more than having a DSLR camera, then you are at right place. Hi, my name is Muhammad Abbas and I am the founder of Muhammad Abbas Photography. If you want to improve your photography skills, then we welcome you to our educational forum. Today we are going to discuss about the exposure triangle. The key element of exposure triangles is the shutter speed, ISO and the aperture. The main purpose of this tutorials is to explain the relationship of aperture, shutter speed and ISO to understand the exposure. So let's talk about first aperture. Aperture is the opening of lens that allows light to enter into the camera. As we discussed in our previous tutorial, which is on f number versus apertures, there is an inverse relation between f number and aperture. If we increase the apertures, the f number will decrease automatically. Wider aperture means more light will enter into the camera and we have more exposure. If we reduce the aperture, it means the picture will get darker and we have less exposure. Now let's see what is the shutter speed. The time taking in opening and closing the shutter is called the shutter speed. The shutter speed defines the amount of light which is entered into the camera. If the shutter speed is faster, it means less amount of light is going to enter into the camera and we have less exposure. On the other hand, if the shutter speed is slow, it means more light will enter into the camera and the picture will be brighter. But if the shutter speed is below the 1/30th part of a second, then the picture will get blurry. That's why we use the tripod with slow shutter speed to get the sharper images. Last but not the least, ISO affects the exposure of a picture. ISO is the camera sensitivity towards light. Its values are measured in numbers like 100, 200, 400, 800 and so on. If we keep the ISO as low as possible, so then we get the high quality images. But if we increase the ISO, so the noise factor is going to increase. If we are shooting under the sunlight, then we set ISO to 100, but when we are shooting indoors, then we set the ISO from 400 to 800. As we increase the ISO, then the exposure will increase. As we decrease the ISO, the exposure will decrease. So let's have a look on the exposure triangles. As you can see in the screen, as we increase the ISO, we get the more exposure. As we decrease the ISO, the value of ISO, we have less exposure and the picture is darker. On the right side, the shutter speed is inversely proportional to the exposure. If we have the faster shutter speed, then the exposure will be less, and if the shutter speed gets slow, then we have the more exposures and the picture will be brighter. On the right side, if we see the aperture relation to the exposure, if we have the wider aperture, it means more light is going to enter into the camera and the picture get more exposed. If the aperture is narrow or small, then less light will enter into the camera and we have the darker images. So this is how we study the aperture, shutter speed and ISO to understand the exposure triangles. You can perform any type of photography using the exposure triangle to get the perfect image. If you want more updates on our upcoming tutorials, then you can subscribe our YouTube channels or you can join our Facebook educational group. The links are shared in the description. Hope you like this videos and see you in the next one.